Good morning, everyone. Welcome and thank you so much for joining us today. My name's Ambert and I'm going to be your host for the next 45 minutes. This webinar is part of Smarter Working Live 2023. During February, we have an amazing array of treats awaiting you. We're hosting 10 days of these bite-sized webinars, followed by our conference day on the 1st of March. You can head over now to smarterworkinglive.com to find out more, to sign up. Let your friends, your family, your neighbours know all about it because all events are free. They're open to anyone in the public sector with an interest in smarter working. So please help us spread the word about these events. So on to this morning's event. We're really pleased that you've decided to spend your time with us today. The purpose of this event and all of our events is to inspire and inform. And here at the Government Property Agency, we are proud to be the natural home of smarter working across government. We are all about creating great places for our people to work so that they can deliver great outcomes. And in the course of our work, we're really lucky to partner with all sorts of organisations to have access to people at the cutting edge of research, of thought leadership. And Smarter Working Live is all about bringing this to you, sharing what we've learned to build up that wider public sector knowledge and experience. And today our topic is one that is at the absolute heart of smarter working. It's about inclusion and employee voice. And there's a reason that people and culture is one of the pillars of smarter working. How people behave, the choices they make about their working day, those unwritten rules about the workplace, all of these matter just as much as the design of the workplace or the technology that enables us to collaborate and connect in new ways. So how can we align our people practices with smarter working principles? We have three absolutely wonderful panellists with us today to explore this topic, and I'm going to invite them to the stage now. So we have Katie Jacobs, who's Senior Stakeholder Lead at the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, or CIPD, as it's commonly known. Good morning, Katie.
Morning.
Then we also have Debra Biggs and Lennie, who both work in employee policy at Civil Service HR. So they look after the civil service people agenda around hybrid working and around wellbeing. So welcome to both of you. And in a minute, I'm going to start the conversation with us all. But first, though, I want to invite all of you watching to get involved. For about the first 20 minutes or so of this webinar, I'm going to be asking questions to the panel. But then the next half of the agenda is over to you. So what do you want to know? What challenges are you facing that our panel could advise you on? What would you find helpful, informative and inspirational for you today? You can type your questions in the chat box, in the comments, and we'll do our best to answer those questions this morning for you. So please feel free to use that at any point during the webinar. We can see your comments in there and we will do our best to answer them for you as we go. So let's get underway. Katie, if I can start with you. At the CIPD, you're in quite a unique function probably because you have a link in with pretty much every organisation in the country's HR function. You've been providing lots and lots of practical support to help organisations consider the new challenges and also the new opportunities of smarter working. So how are organisations thinking about inclusion in the context of smarter working?
So I think inclusion is a really interesting one because it's almost a little bit of a smarter working when it comes to inclusion is a little bit of a double-edged sword. It could go one of two ways. And I think you saw a lot of people recognising that before we kind of came out of the pandemic, as it were, and into kind of a more set in stone way of hybrid working. I'll start with the positive way first. So obviously, we believe that flexible and hybrid and smarter working can be a real kind of boon to inclusion. We know that kind of flexible working helps those with all sorts of stuff going on in their personal lives, and kind of caring responsibilities, to kind of managing conditions, to just wanting to have a little bit better kind of whether work-life balance or work-life integration, that giving people the flexibility around how and where they work can be super helpful in that. And we know that that's something that lots of people are looking for and may not even consider taking a job or considering applying for a job without access to that kind of thing. So in that way can be really, really positive. I think on the other side of things, there are a few kind of watch outs. And I remember thinking about this kind of in 2020, it kind of struck me as people were talking about what the future of work could look like when we were all able to go back to offices or not go back to offices or work however we wished. That if the office becomes an almost a proxy for performance, which I think it was a little bit in the past. So we all know that kind of the people who were working potentially the longest hours or kind of being there earliest and leaving the latest, that could be seen as a signifier of being really, really super committed or amazing performers. So if you get to a space where those people who are in the office, actually think it is quite interesting, obviously myself, Dawn and Debra have all chosen to be in the office today, and is at home, that those people then are seen to be more committed to the organisation, potentially higher performing. If you are linking any kind of reward and opportunity and development opportunities to being present, if you are linking a lot of opportunities potentially to get involved with projects, to be around those kind of water cooler moments, if you're having meetings where a few people are dialing in and a few people are there in the office, but then when all the people dial in, close down their computer and everybody else makes the actual decision at the end of the meeting in the little bit of small talk that comes afterwards or before, then you are excluding the people who haven't been able to be there. So in terms of that, it all comes back to kind of, I guess, management maturity and the ability to judge performance on outcomes and to manage on outcomes. And I think if you're not in that space and you don't have managers that you're supporting and enabling to manage in that way, or who are not willing and need a little bit of help to learn how to manage in that way, and leaders to learn how to manage in that way, you potentially end up in a space where you are actually embedding some of the less inclusive behaviours that we had beforehand. So I think it's just being aware that it could be really, really positive, but it also could have some unintended consequences. And I think it all comes back to the kind of the culture that we create and how we help our managers to lead their teams, really. And I'm sure we will talk a little bit more about that later.
I am sure we will, Katie, because I think that's it. That really interesting UK-wide perspective. It's something that all organisations are grappling with at the moment. They're all having to consider this and think about what approach do they take. So I was really interested to pick this up now with you, Debra, around within the civil service, there's over 450,000 people employed on hundreds of different working terms and lots of many different needs probably from HR policies in that respect. So where have you seen the biggest benefits of hybrid and smarter working in the civil service HR community, and where are there still challenges, do you think, picking up on Katie's point?
Okay. So I think, as Katie said, I think for a lot of organisations, and particularly across the civil service, the shock of going into the ways of working during the pandemic and then thinking about how we would come out of that has driven through some real cultural changes and busted so many myths about location, not just location where you can work, but also how we can work and actually what's possible. So that's been a huge benefit. And I think as a result of that experience, for many civil servants particularly, we're a lot closer to where location and how you work is no longer a determinant of the role that you can have, but also how your career might progress through the civil service. We're certainly starting to realise in lots of organisations the benefits of being flexible around location and smarter working or hybrid working. Some groups in the past particularly have not had that positive lived experience of a career. You could highlight carers and part-timers, for example, but there are lots of other groups that have had a much poorer experience. And by focusing much more on inclusivity, there's been a marked improvement for their experience. And we've seen that reflected in some of the work that we've been doing on our HR policies, particularly things like performance management or attendance management, which were perhaps quite cut and dried in the past. How many widgets or what have you. Whereas now we're looking at a much more holistic, inclusive approach to some of those sort of one-to-one management, line management areas. So performance management, for example, is much more focused on much more regular conversations, your well-being, not just how many widgets you've turned out. So we've definitely seen some positive shifts, particularly in our HR policy work, but there are also lots of challenges, and I think as Katie's recognised quite a few of them already. So the lived experience of civil servants, although our change in ways of working has been positive for many. It hasn't been that positive all of the time, and not necessarily for everybody. So I think we need to be really conscious that there are some people who are still adjusting to the new ways of working, and particularly smart working. As you say, it's a huge cultural change, and we need to make sure that people are supported to make that change and to understand how they can contribute to it. We've also got we're very conscious that we need to make sure we've got parity of experience. So we have an awful lot of people that work in operational, face-to-face, frontline roles in parts of our organisation where they can't, for example, work from home part of the week, or the opportunities to flexibly work are more limited. And there's a real risk that we'll end up with a two-tier workforce, which we're working very hard to ensure that we can make sure that there's smarter working experience and a better experience is enjoyed by all of our workforce. I think one of the real things that people were concerned about as we started to come out of the pandemic, and we were starting to realise the benefits of smarter working and new ways of working, was that there was a danger that we would snap back to old ways. And I don't think we have snapped back, but I think without a really coherent strategy and keeping our eyes on the prize, there's a danger we might drift back. So although we didn't snap back, I think there is a real danger that if we're not careful, and if we're not seeing this through, there's a challenge in making sure we don't drift back. In terms of HR policies, we're also making sure that we review all of our policies. Are they fit for purpose? Are they supporting employees to be able to work in new ways? And are they supporting line managers to understand their role, which we can't argue with the fact that a line manager's role has changed significantly now that we're working in different ways. We've also still got some technology challenges, but for me, I think that the main one is recognising that this isn't necessarily a property or an estate challenge in terms of smarter working. It's definitely a leadership one, and ensuring that we're all over that.
Thank you, Debra. And should just give a quick plug that we have got a session all themed around leadership next week on Tuesday. So we will be definitely covering that in more detail. And I'm sure we will talk about the role that leaders play during the course of this conversation as well. Dawn, I wanted to bring you in on this, because we were talking about kind of support that we can provide for people. Debra picked up a lot about support for managers in kind of transitioning to new ways of working. And it's fair to say, wellbeing has definitely shot up the agenda of not just the HR community, but probably the wider C-suite as well. And there's been so much change to the way we work, making us more accessible, kind of blurring some of those boundaries between home and work that people experienced over the last couple of years. And as Debra said, that kind of drift being a challenge, maybe that people might kind of drift back to different ways of working, which can all affect our well-being. So how has the civil service been looking at the individual employees' well-being through all of this, and kind of talk me through a little bit about what you've been doing and what resources are available to help you?
Well, on our team, obviously, when the pandemic hit, we had to try and think of ways to reach everybody, and that was one of the real big challenges for us, to find a platform that could be easily accessed by all civil servants, because obviously we've all got different ways of connecting with our own departments. So as a team, we approached the Charity for Civil Servants, which we work with really closely anyway, to see if they could offer us anything maybe on their pages. So what we did was we built a hub site on their pages that we could load with lots of different types of resources. And the charity website, it's available to all civil servants, and it can be accessed remotely as well, which is good. It's not just via that government system, so people can look at it through their own personal devices as well. So throughout the last couple of years, we've been working with them to create this hub, to collect things like tips on smart working, how to manage a remote team, IT tips, things like how to schedule emails and things like that, to give people that opportunity to disconnect when they need to and not be working all the time, and can schedule things. And the hub, that's actually been live since July 2021. So we did bring it in relatively quickly when the lockdown started, and we've had over 60,000 page views on the hub, and that's continuing all the time. We add new content around every 6 months. We move things around. We're in touch with the team in the charity to make sure that the actual content on there works. And we have worked with them. They've got some of their own content, and we've provided content as well. And a lot of the HR wellbeing leads include this hub in their own work plans so that they can actually tell the staff that this is a resource that they can use. So it's not just about us just putting it on there, it is actually getting out there via the wellbeing networks as well. So there's a lot of resources out there to use, and we are adding to them all the time in this ever-changing world. So it's not something that's just a set thing, it is a work in progress.
Thank you, Dawn. I feel like we've touched on loads of great starting points for conversations already, and I'm conscious I do not want to hog the whole conversation during this webinar. So a reminder to all of you watching, we would love your questions for the panel. You can use the comments box to send in your questions. Please don't be shy, because it is an open forum. We'd love to take your questions, but while we wait for those, I've got a few more of my own, if that's okay. So Katie, in your opening, you kind of touched on probably that real sort of challenge that organisations have, where they're all looking to others to go, what are other people doing? That reassurance that they need to go, are we doing what's in line with everybody else? So how do you think that's impacting kind of how leaders are approaching this issue, that the kind of maybe there's still some nervousness maybe about doing something that's out of step with everybody else?
So I think what's quite interesting is that a lot of organisations are trying to make a kind of a decision, and that's like it. We want to set it in stone, because when stuff is set in stone, then we all feel more comfortable and we can just move on and kind of look to the future, or as Debra said, perhaps like drift back to the comfortable old ways of doing things. But I think that it's really important that, especially as kind of HR professionals and people who really understand culture, that we recognise that the entire kind of nation and kind of everybody who works for us at all levels have been through a pretty traumatic experience for the last couple of years. And I think that all the pieces have been chucked up in the air and they have fallen down, but we still have quite a lot of opportunity to kind of do some moving around. And I feel that the kind of rush to, this is what we're doing, this is 100%, and we're stuck on this, and let's just move forward and kind of try and forget about everything that happened, is potentially not the best way of doing things. And that the organisations that seem to be having a little bit more success with it are those that are seeing it a little bit more as an opportunity to experiment and to, kind of say to your people, we perhaps don't know where we'll be in a year with this. We're going to try this, we're going to try this. It's kind of a work in progress. And those organisations that perhaps are struggling a little bit more are those that said very early on, 100%, either you can work from wherever you want and you never have to come back to the office, or we want you in 4 days a week. And it's those organisations that are being more consultative about it and that are treating it more as an opportunity to try new things and to see what works and what doesn't work, and to, say, kind of consult with their people and to do it as kind of more collective experiment in a way, that are having more success with it. So I think in terms of what are people doing, there's just like a huge spectrum of the organisations that I talk to. So you've got those organisations that are being very strict and are mandating that their people come in kind of 3-4 days a week. You will find that those organisations will report having mixed levels of success on that mandate. So sometimes people will be going with it, other times people will be pushing back against it. If they are measuring it at all, they might find that it's not giving them the results that they are hoping for. So then it's about the conversations that the HR person is often pulled into with leaders. So I think you've got this bit of a mismatch of expectations that we're seeing between kind of the workforce and the leadership. So got organisations doing that kind of thing. I think you've got organisations that are, so something I'm seeing in kind of, I guess, more progressive or mature organisations, I think is quite interesting, is thinking more about activity-based working and thinking more about the type of activity and where that is best to be done. So are you doing a piece of work that requires collaboration, therefore you all need to get together? Or are you doing a piece of work that requires deep thinking, therefore perhaps that should be done at home, or you need to recognise that you need to provide somebody with a space to do that in an office where they won't necessarily be interrupted? Is it synchronous work or is it asynchronous work? And just thinking about that. But that requires a kind of collective thinking about how we structure work as well. So I think I was speaking to a CPO earlier in the week, and he was talking about, they were thinking about getting rid of the I think they were telling people they wanted them in 40% of the time or something like that, and they actually were getting people in that or more, so it had been quite successful for them. But he was thinking of taking that away and actually replacing it with something that's like, we expect you, if you are doing a one-to-one, if you are doing a team meeting, if you are doing this and this, then training, then we expect that to be done in the office. So it was more about the activity that was done rather than about the amount of time, because the amount of time is such a blunt kind of measurement that really doesn't mean anything, right? But it's more about what is the activity that we're doing and how does that impact on productivity? And I think organizations that are thinking about it in that way are potentially going to see more success with it. I think there's a bit in that managing expectations piece. I think we're seeing a need for a bit more of to encourage the workforce to think a little bit more collectively, because I think there's quite a lot of individualism that potentially has crept in. So how can we encourage people to see that what might not be the best for them in this moment might be the best for everybody else? So if you think potentially about training younger workers, for example, we know that people who are at the beginning of their careers are feeling a little bit isolated if they don't have the opportunity to kind of learn from others. So how can we encourage people who are a little bit more privileged in terms of the experience that they have and kind of the knowledge of the organisation and systems to see that they perhaps have a bit of an organisational responsibility in terms of organisational citizenship to give back to that next generation. So I think it's exactly as Debra was saying, it's not seeing it as a states or a workplace even issue, but seeing it as a leadership and culture issue, and kind of widening out to that is where you'll have more success with it.
Thanks. And that sounds like a really interesting approach for that organisation that you mentioned to take, that they've started with a target, a measure, and then looking at the results of that and seeing actually what does that tell them about the types of activities people are doing, having that as the main driver of that.
It's just a more mature way of thinking about how we work, I think, but it's also harder. So I think it's a lot easier to say we want people in 3 days a week, done.
And
think about
Debra,
it.
I wonder if I could bring you in here, because I think a lot of the challenges that in the public sector, people quite like things to be very clear, to be very rules-based, to be very clear where we're at. But actually, the examples Katie's talking about is very much kind of more about looking at the individual organisation and what work is that's done there and kind of what's best suited to that. Kind of, how have you found that approach across the civil service around kind of looking for consistency, but also balance and individuality in that?
So, I mean, we as you say, we've got such a huge range of different types of businesses. Even within a single department, there will be, a huge variety of businesses. So, the description that Katie gave definitely resonates across the civil service. So we went from something like 80% of civil servants working from home all of the time during the pandemic. We swung completely the other way to having a mandatory office attendance for those that had been working from home, and we're now very much seeing the pendulum come back the other way, in that we've got a range of maturity factors here. So those departments that were already on their smarter working journey were already realizing the benefits of a hybrid or a flexible work, very quickly moved away or didn't go to the mandatory office attendance, and have already gone to the whole, working as a team. What works best for the team? Where will the team be most productive? And where can I, as an individual, fulfill my potential? So if I'm doing something, a nice, piece of work where I need to be quiet and reflective, it's okay for me to choose, to work from home or from somewhere else that's quiet. If I need to be in with the team, or if we're working on something or there's something more intense, I might go into the office every single day. So we've got those organisations that their smarter working journey, they're much more mature in their journey, and they're able to work like that. Then we've got others where the whole working from home was very alien to them. So they've swung back to a mandatory percentage of attendance, but they're now starting to transition to something that is more business focused, but working with their employees to understand their experience. So we're constantly surveying people. So we do a whole civil service people survey, but also each part of the business is also working very closely with their employees to understand what's working for them. What is it that's allowing them as an individual to be more effective? How and where can they be more effective? And then moving away from that, the individualism, as Katie described, to actually having those conversations as a team and as an organisation. So we we've got all ends of the spectrum at the moment, and we're very much in a transitional space. We're certainly not fixed on any one thing at the moment.
Thanks, Deborah. And I think we've focused quite a lot about kind of the top down, the organisation view of what can the organisation put in place to help individuals. And I kind of wanted to flip it back around again and bring you in here, Dawn, to think about from the individual's perspective, kind of how are some of the tools and the support that we've given helps individuals feel more able to talk about what will positively impact them around their well-being and their ability to do their job well. Do you think that part of it, when we talk about the culture change that's needed, it strikes me that both of those are just as important as each other, the organisation, but also the individual?
Yeah, I mean, the individual's voice is, it was interesting that Debra said about, getting the experiences of people. And a lot of the work we do on our wellbeing team is around understanding that lived experience. And I think we get a lot of information from the top down saying, we should be doing this, we should be doing that. But actually getting those stories from people that, how they can work, how it helps them, helps with their work-life balance and things along those sorts of lines is really important. And again, I'm going back to the hub again. This is where we're able to actually give that information to the civil service, to the staff, to say, look, this is a lived experience. This is how it's helping somebody. And I think actually having that level, and seeing from that point of view, rather than just the people from the top actually saying we should be doing this, actually helps people resonate with it a lot more. So, if you've got somebody that's working in a similar sort of situation to you, and you can see how working smarter, working in a hybrid way is working for them, then that will help you to understand how it can work better for you as well. So, there's a lot of work goes on in our team to make sure that we get those sorts of messages out to people, so that they understand that, these are the things that can do. There's lots of policies around and things, but actually at the end of the day, how is it working on the ground level? So, we do work a lot on that side of things.
Thank you, Dawn. And we've had a question in from the audience that probably picks up on that point. They're interested to know what activities are any of you considering or trying out even about that will help build that greater inclusion and build the employee voice more into that consideration of forming new policies or new strategies. Katie, you've probably got lots of organisations looking at lots of different things that they're piloting. Are there any that strike you that have done anything that is having any success in this area at the moment?
So I think it's striking the balance, isn't it? Because you can survey people relentlessly. I think over the pandemic, people probably got a little bit of survey fatigue. So I think when it comes to kind of building those mechanisms for employee voice, it's probably recognising that people are individual, right? And that different people like to be communicated with or to offer feedback in different ways. And that's not to say that you can, if you've got, 150,000 people or whatever, that you can speak to all of those people one-on-one. Obviously, you can't give that everybody. You've got to have it kind of within balance, but it's kind of thinking about the different tools that you can offer. So I think one of the nice things that online communication has done for some people is it's essentially leveled the playing field in terms of the fact that you can message somebody a lot more senior than you in a hierarchy, or kind of say something on a chat that you might have felt you didn't want to put your hand up. Because it's quite a scary thing to put your hand up, isn't it? Whereas putting a question into a chat like this is a lot easier. So I think in that way, it's kind of leveled the playing field in the kind of voice that you can give people. I think that some organisations are seeing there's a little bit of a downside to that as well, particularly if you're allowing people to express themselves anonymously. So there's some quite interesting stats that I was looking at a few months ago, actually, about the rising kind of online bullying and complaints around kind of cyber bullying at work, and the kind of treatment that people feel is unacceptable online. So I think we need to be really alert to that, as I'm hearing quite a lot from HR directors that you're seeing a kind of explosion in ER cases because people have, as I call it, forgotten how to play nicely with others, because we were all kind of forced into a little box during the pandemic. And now, like I say, we've all gone through this kind of immense trauma and we've all been forced back together again, but in a world that is really, really different and quite uncomfortable. So all of that is causing all sorts of issues. I think in terms of the inclusion in the last couple of years, we've seen quite a big move forward in that, and a lot more. And I know the civil service is great at this kind of movement around kind of ERGs and kind of giving people the empowerment and the tools they need to kind of do peer-to-peer engagement and influencing the business in that way. Where I think that works most effectively is where you're able to give those groups the autonomy and the resources and the support, rather than just giving somebody a carte blanche to go off and do whatever you want. It has to be that, how is the business going to support you and also challenge you in doing that? So are you allowing them almost to create business cases for how they operate, and then as an HR team supporting them, giving them the resources they need to actually run it effectively? And I think where you see that happening is having the most impact.
Thank you, Katie. It was a really interesting consideration, isn't it? You brought that out really well, about kind of sort of ways of behaving with each other have shifted probably over the last couple of years, and kind of having to help people negotiate kind of new ways of communicating, where things that we took for granted before around body language, tone of voice, that kind of thing gets lost completely, doesn't it, with new forms of communication? I suppose that's a whole new area for
absolutely. And there's things like you almost have to build into management, I think, you have to build in time, especially if you're working remotely, that actually it's not time wasting to have a little bit of small talk at the beginning of a conversation, or to ask somebody how they are really and take the time to answer it, because I think it's all too easy when we're working remotely to fall. And I know so many people did this during the pandemic. You just fall into the habit of being back to back, kind of half hour, and there's no space for anything else. Whereas when you were in the office, perhaps there was space and the stuff would creep in to have a little bit of social conversation. And I think if we're just communicating like this all the time, we just need to be a little bit more intentional about building in the space for social connection and connecting with each other on a human to human level, because we are all human at the end of the day.
I think just picking up on something about that, it's just something that I've known a team doing. You talked earlier about people coming into the office for specific things like team meetings and one-to-ones and things. And I know that, the team that I know have actually taken it a little bit further, not actually had a team meeting day, but said, right, we're going to have a day in the office where we're all going to come in and work in the office together and just have a normal working office day like we used to do. And then you're building all those social conversations as well. But make sure that you actually tie in that everybody books a desk to go into the office on that day. You get people coming to sit together, and having that almost like old-fashioned type office banter there, but not as a regular thing, maybe once a month, maybe every now and again. So it's not actually a physical team meeting, but you are actually having that social interaction, as well as talking to each other about work, and having that opportunity to just, without having to put that meeting in to ask the question. I think a lot of people are missing that side of things as well. You could just be working on something, you can just shout across the desk, can you help me with this? Can you do that? I think that's been missed as well, but there are ways of doing things like that without actually having that, you will come into the office on so many days a week. So it's interesting what you were saying there as well, Katie, about that social side of things, and that as part of the wellbeing team that we work on is something that we were trying to promote as well, that you do need to have that social interaction as well, and not that back-to-back working every single day.
And it's a really interesting consideration, isn't it? The point you mentioned, Katie, about kind of what's the value of this time. I think that's an area that probably no one's tried to put a value on previously, have they? But actually it's when it's not there, you notice it's lost. So I wonder if that's something that's creeping into kind of HR policy or HR thinking around how do we put a value on some of these sorts of activities and how much they contribute to people's overall sense of well-being, that sense of belonging, that sense of common purpose. Is there anything kind of emerging in the thinking around that?
So actually, I was just at our applied research conference last week, and there was a paper on new starters, particularly, that this professor had done this research into how committed they felt to an organisation, and kind of against the amount of time they spent with other people in person. And it was just really fascinating. Not really surprising, I think instinctively we would know it. And a lot of HR directors say this to me when we're having conversations about what they're worried about with like the rise of remote working, is that people were saying, I could be working anywhere. I think one person was asked, do you feel like a sense of belonging to the organisation? And they said, I feel like I belong to my kitchen table. So that sense, they were kind of committed to their job potentially, and they were committed to their career development, but there was absolutely no commitment to the organisation. Whereas if the organisation had made a little bit more of an effort to have more kind of social induction, more in-person interactions, making them feel part of the team, part of something bigger and part of a community, then there was a much more significant connection to the organisation. And although it didn't trace the study, I would not be surprised if you would see that play out in retention levels.
We've definitely seen connectedness, as I've seen it described as, I don't know if that's a real word, connectedness come up as an issue. It's definitely an issue and one of the challenges to the new ways of working, and also a challenge to line managers and how we all operate. I mean, too often you might hear, out of the blue, you might hear something, someone's off sick or something's happening in some part of the business, and it happened several months ago, and you are completely oblivious to how, whatever's happening in other parts of your team or your organization, because we've lost some of that connectedness. So there's definitely a value from a personal human level, but also a work level as well.
Thank you all. We've probably got time for one more question in from the audience. If anyone wants to quickly add something into the comments, we've got something in from Deppy. Thank you, Deppy, about probably a common challenge for a lot of organisations where different parts of the organisation says it's coming from staff and leaders wanting an organisation-wide mandated set days in the office, and looking for some advice about how to how to broach that conversation, how to kind of help broker that conversation in an organisation where different people and different segments of the organisation have different views on this.
I think you'd always start with kind of why. So I think a lot of things that leaders are asking for or employees are asking for is they're coming up with this as a solution, but potentially what is the problem that they're trying to solve in the first place? So do they have any actual data or a kind of evidence base to suggest that productivity is much lower? What are the concerns that they feel that this would solve? Is it, on a leader's basis, often you hear cynically, and staff will say this as well, is it just because, they think they're spending too much money on real estate and that's why they want to get us back into the office? Is it because they feel that collaboration is down? Is it because clients are complaining? Is it because we can actually track that our productivity is down? Is it because it's affecting retention and culture? But just trying to actually figure out what is the problem that you're trying to solve, I think is always a good place to start. And then hopefully you can come up with a solution that is perhaps a little bit less blunt instrument. But I think starting with that and also being consultative at all levels around it to make it will make it land more effectively.
Thank you, Katie. And I think that's kind of, as we said, a lot of organisations looking to each other to see what to do, but actually that internal metrics is important as well, isn't it? So kind of probably that's where something where, the HR community has a lot of information at its fingertips that maybe hasn't always been pieced together, as you said, around kind of attraction of new employees, retention of existing employees, future talent strategies, all those sorts of things, and kind of how inclusion is built into that. So how employees' expectations potentially are shifting. People are expecting different things. And Debra, I wondered for the civil service, that's obviously something that is still kind of an ongoing, as we said, it's not something you just set down once and it's done. But I guess I'm interested in kind of, is there an ongoing conversation happening around the new people strategy and kind of how that's going to support the civil service for what it needs for the future, and how much this aspect plays into that?
Absolutely. So as you mentioned, there's a new people strategy being worked up, and that's tied obviously very much to our our workforce planning for the future years, and obviously for our estate strategy as well, because you can't ignore some of those things. And as Katie said, it's very much aligned to what's the problem we're trying to solve, or where is it we actually want to be in 5-10 years? What sort of organisation do we want to be? And some of the data, whether that's qualitative or quantitative, definitely has to play into that. Absolutely, you can't ignore the data, and that's underpinning a lot of the work that we're doing in terms of our HR policies, but also, as you say, the people strategy as well.
Thank you, Debra. Right, I said we have time for one more question, and we've got one that's come in that I know comes up time and time again, Debra, in all the conversations that we have across the civil service HR community about equipment and providing equipment for people, around kind of again, it's probably similar to the last question, balancing the different needs between the individual and the business around kind of how do we make sure it's fair and as accessible as possible. I know this has come up a lot, so I'll go to you first, Debra, but Katie, I'd love to hear from a CIPD point of view as well, kind of how do we balance that tension, and how do we make sure that we're providing the right resources to help people work effectively and allowing them to feel like they're able to make that request, I guess.
So as an organisation, we did exactly that from very early on in the pandemic. It was about enabling people to perform effectively and have the equipment that they needed, as much as anything, to work safely as well as effectively. So for us, there are kind of two tiers. So there are people that have a reasonable adjustment or a requirement for equipment, and if they've got that and they're working hybridly, then we will provide that both in their home and in their workplace. But also more widely across the rest of the workforce. If we're encouraging hybrid working, which we are, we will provide the equipment that's necessary for that person to perform safely within their home environment. And we give lots of advice and guidance to individuals and to line managers to make sure that there is that safe and effective working environment. And then around that, we provide we make provision for if an individual changes role or moves from one department to another, how that equipment it then moves with them. Because it won't surprise you to learn there are lots of complicated tax rules about the provision of equipment as well. So we're supporting managers and departments to understand that tax position, but to also see that any investment in that equipment is money well spent. And that's the position we took from very early on in the pandemic.
Thank you, Debra. Katie, does that echo with your experiences, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it depends, I guess, on how specialist the equipment is on that. So obviously, yeah, as Debra was saying, if it is your kind of future vision to have people working in as kind of smart a way as possible, then we have to enable them to do that in a safe way and empower and enable people to work from home. I mean, I think if it's without more context, but personally, I think if it's not financially viable to provide incredibly expensive equipment, then is there a way to come up with a creative solution where you structure work slightly differently so people don't need access to this equipment all the time, that they can work at home for the days where they don't need access, and perhaps you rotor it slightly differently so that you can build in flexibility where you can, because obviously organisations don't have unlimited funds to be enabling people to work from wherever they want. And I do think, coming back to a point that Debra made at the beginning, it's a bit about that parity of experience as well, and kind of building in flexibility where you can, and being very alert to the idea of a two-tier workforce. But ultimately, there are some roles that cannot be done from home. Like you can't do a knee operation on somebody from home. You can't, there's lots of things that you cannot do from home. So it's just understanding that the type of role. And I think sometimes just having an adult conversation about what is possible as well, because just some things are not physically possible.
Thank you all. I'm afraid that was the last question that we had time for, because this 45 minutes has absolutely flown by. And I feel like we probably could have had this conversation 10 times over and still probably had more to talk about. So a huge thank you to Katie, to Debra and to Dawn for being our expert panel this morning and for sharing their time and their amazing insights with us. I do hope that this has informed and inspired you, and it's given you some new ideas to take back to your own organisations, maybe re-energised you for something that you've been pondering how to approach. I think, again, the sense that, organisations are all going through this together at the same time. It's all very new for everybody is the thing I will definitely take from this, but that exploring this with employees, making sure that they're included in this process seems so important, and so at the heart of this, and looking at what data you've got to help make that case is definitely something that's come through really strongly for me. We'd love to know if this event was useful to you. We've got a really quick feedback survey in the chat. I promise it will take you about 10 seconds and no more, but we'd love to know how it's gone so that we can try and make sure that all these events are meeting your needs. And don't forget that Smarter Working Live 2023 includes a whole month of webinars like this during February, so you can head over to smarterworkinglive.com for the full lineup and to sign up for more. And our conference day on the 1st of March promises to be a really exciting and immersive experience. And one more plug for something on that. We are handing over parts of the agenda to you, the attendees this time, for you to tell us what you would like to talk about, what would help you most. to inform your smarter working strategies. There's a poll in Slido where you can give us your feedback about what topics you would like us to see. We've got some really, really exciting speakers and opportunities for you to tell them what you'd like to hear about on that agenda. So please do give us that feedback on that. So a final thank you to our wonderful panellists this morning for their time. Thank you all for joining us this morning, and I do hope to see you at more of our events over the month or at Smarter Working Live Conference Day. That's it for this morning, so enjoy the rest of your day.